I never imagined life would lead me to this point, teetering on the edge of despair, clinging to the last remnants of my self-respect. Just a few months ago, everything seemed stable. I had a job, a home, and a marriage that, while not flawless, felt secure. But now everything was fading away like grain of sand, slips, bills piled up faster than I could manage my bank balance, a mocking series of numbers that only highlighted my lack of job applications vanished without a trace. Rejections filled my inbox, and every opportunity I led to frustrating. I tried to keep my irritation from my husband Daniel, but the tension between us was utterly oppressive. He had changed from the man I said I'd to 5 years ago. In those moments, he would hold me after a challenging day, assuring me that everything would be all right. Now he barely glanced in my direction, his words cold and distant, as if I were merely an inconvenience in his already overwhelming life. When I shared news of yet another unsuccessful interview, his response was minimal. "I'm trying my hardest," I said, my voice quivering. He sighed wearily, rubbing his temples with his fingers. "Effort alone isn't enough to sustain us, Emma. Obligations don't pause." It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it, as if I had already become a hopeless. That night, I found myself wide awake, staring at the ceiling, immersed in a sense of failure. The rent was overdue, the landlord's warning still echoing in the air. The threat of eviction loomed mere days away. I considered reaching out to my parents, but the burden of admitting defeat felt too overwhelming. The next morning, after Daniel left for work in silence, I made my decision. I needed to visit Mr. Carter. He stood there like a figure of authority, tall, broad-shouldered, always impeccably dressed, exuding a calm dominance. He owned multiple properties and clearly wielded wealth and influence. Our exchanges had been limited to typical landlord-tenant interactions. As I knocked on his office door, my hands trembled with apprehension. He flung the door open, his deep eyes studying me intently, as if he had an innate understanding of my intentions. "Emma," he said with calm charm, leaning against the doorframe, "I was curious when you'd finally show up." His words sent a shiver through me. With a faint smile, I hesitated. I need more time to manage the rent. I lost my job and things have been tough." He interrupted me. "I understand. I closely monitor my tenant. It seems you've been facing challenges for a while." Shame coursed down my spine. I despised that he had noticed. "Listen," I took a deep breath. "If I could just have a little more time, I assure you that." He chuckled softly, shaking his head in amusement. "Emma, landlords don't thrive on empty assurances." My throat tightened. I had nothing more to offer. "I can't extend the time," he continued, "but I can propose an alternative." His gaze lingered, making me uneasy. I anticipated his words before they left his lips. "You're a beautiful woman," he remarked casually, as if commenting on the day's weather forecast, "and I strongly believe in fair exchanges." My body tensed, and I stepped back, my thoughts swirling. The words caught in my throat. "No pressure," he noted, raising his hands in feigned innocence. "You need assistance. I can provide it. No commitments involved, no strings attached, as if that made it easier." I turned and strode away, my heart pounding. Outside, I felt a rush of fresh air, but his proposal lingered like an unwelcome shadow. Daniel returned home late that night. I stayed awake, yearning for any sign that he still cared, but he barely acknowledged my presence. "You're later than expected," I remarked softly. "Work ran late." He sighed, loosening his tie. I wanted to believe him, but something in his tone seemed off. "Daniel, are we okay?" My voice was barely audible. He looked at me, truly looked for the first time in weeks, but instead of warmth, all I sensed was fatigue. "We're fine, Emma," he said, though the words hung in the air heavy with deceit. I nodded, feeling empty in my chest. That night, Mr. Carter's offer haunted my mind. How tempting it was to simply agree just this once to escape this chaos. The idea repulsed me, but I reassured myself that I would find an alternative path. I had to, yet his words stayed seeping into every thought. The most challenging aspect. For a fleeting moment, it seemed enticing. Reason screamed that it was a mistake, but the voice within me, suffocating financial desperation, whispered, "What other choice is there?" As time passed, the situation only worsened. Countless job listings, applications sent but silent return. I parted with old clothes, anything I could spare, but it barely covered groceries, let alone rent. Daniel rarely uttered a word, constantly arriving late, exhausted, perpetual. Some eve he didn't return. I know, silent, reluctant, I touched the faint scent of an unfamiliar. I can myself, it was a disreality stress. Yet beneath this, I realized something had already. 3 days later, the eviction arrived, a final warning, no ex. My hands shook as I absorbed my stomach. I considered contacting Daniel, but it seemed futile. He hadn't shown concern before, and I doubted he would now. In the solitude of our dimly lit apartment, the weight of reality crashed over me like a fierce tide. No money, no job, no support. I had pleaded, struggled, and tried my utmost, but nothing seemed to work. Mr. Carter's words echoed fair exchanges, no strings attached. Staring at the phone, my fingers hovering over his number, a heavy dread flooded my chest. I always believed I would stand firm in my principles, never allowing myself to sink to such depths. Yet I had never felt this desperate before. I pressed call. The phone barely had a chance to ring before he answered, his voice brimming with confidence and familiarity. Emma, your appearance was anticipated. Shame seared through me, but I swallowed it. I need help. The agreement was established, no specific details, just a mutual understanding. My hands trembled as I ended the call, my heart pounding so fiercely I feared it might shatter my ribs. I lingered in quiet reflection, trying to convince myself I could go through with it just this once for survival. Yet I understood there was no such thing as just once. The guilt bound me before the event occurred, tightening around my thoughts like a suffocating noose. I reminded myself to set aside thoughts of Daniel, to avoid dwelling on the actions I was about to undertake. I had been loyal for 5 years. But had he? I wanted to hold fast to that belief, but uncertainty overpowered my denial. Meeting Mr. Carter again felt like stepping into a journey with no return. His presence was commanding, his confidence unwavering. He didn't inquire about my certainty. He was aware. When it concluded, a wave of nausea overwhelmed me, rendering me unable to face my own reflection. My body felt foreign, as if I had traded a part of myself for something ephemeral, insignificant in the grand scheme. Yet there was also a sense of relief. The rent was paid and eviction was averted. After months of struggle, I finally felt buoyant. I convinced myself it was over, that I would never tread that path again, that I could resume life as if nothing had changed. I was mistaken. Upon returning to the apartment, I found Daniel waiting, and his gaze indicated he sensed a shift in the air. His eyes remained steady, observing me in a way he hadn't in months, not with fatigue or indifference, but with a hint of suspicion. Initially silent, he watched as I moved through the apartment, feigning normalcy. But I sensed it, the change, the burden of my choices weighing heavily. Even without evidence, an undeniable intuition stirred within him. I maintained distance, fearing he might discern the guilt etched on my face. He seemed quieter than usual. When he finally spoke, his tone was even and cautious. "Where were you today?" My stomach twisted. I stepped out. He nodded cautiously, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "Where to?" I paused, uncertain. That was enough. He refrained from pressing further, but the damage was done. The days that followed felt like endless torment. He grew increasingly cold, more distant. I believed I had concealed my guilt effectively, but the atmosphere became heavy, stifling. He ceased asking questions, but they lingered in his every glance. I reminded myself that he had been distant, first that I wasn't the only one harboring secrets, the perfume, the late nights, the way he had detached from our marriage long before my decision. Yet that didn't lessen the guilt tormenting me. At that moment, I stumbled upon the message. The phone lay on the counter, its screen illuminated with an untouched notification. An unknown name, a message I wished I could erase last night, was wonderful. "When can we meet again?" My chest tightened, the words blurring. I hoped it was merely an error, that there might be another explanation, yet I recognized the truth. I had recognized it for some time. I gently placed the phone down, as if any roughness might amplify the reality I was confronting. I anticipated a surge of anger, the pain of betrayal crashing over me, but all I experienced was numbness. When Daniel arrived, I chose not to address him immediately. I hoped he would break the silence, at least pretend to be truthful about his late work. He didn't. He barely glanced my way. I voiced my thoughts. Who is that woman? He became, still his body rigid, though his face remained expression. He didn't ask. He understood. Emma, please don't deceive me. I interrupted. Not now, he sighed, running a hand over discussion, settling. It's the impression you might have. I chuckled, devoid of real amusement. It never is it? Silence stretched. Finally he exhaled. It wasn't something I intended to happen. It simply did. The worst, but his calm demeanor hurt even more. A prolonged acceptance, a lack of remorse evident. How long? My voice nearly inaudible. His silence spoke volume. Something in me shattered the final thread, unraveled. I could no longer. I did too, He snapped his head up, his full focus time in months. Pardon, I his gaze. My heart raced. I did it. A flicker of surprise, the shadow of something with whom I took a deep breath. Mr. The stillness was suffocating, contorted with both shock and anger. You must be joking. But deep down, he knew I shook my head in disbelief. I was in complete desperation. We were on the verge of eviction. I didn't know what else to do. His laugh cut through the air, laced with bitterness. Does that justify it? I tightened my fists. Do you truly believe your actions are more justifiable? He stepped closer, his gaze intense. At least I maintained my integrity. The words resonated with fierce intensity. My breath quickened, but I held his stare. At least I acted to endure. What's your reason? For a brief moment we stood silent, gazing at each other, both understanding there was nothing left to fight for. The affection, the faith all had vanished. Daniel shook his head, stepping back. This is beyond my capacity. I anticipated what lay ahead. I'm leaving. I remained silent, merely nodding, offering no resistance or tears. Deep within, I had always sensed this was the conclusion. As he gathered his belongings and stepped out, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space. I had wished my actions wouldn't affect everything, that we could simply move forward after all. Yet, we had been broken long before. The apartment's stillness was overwhelming. Daniel had departed, and for the first time in years, I found myself alone, no longer waiting, no longer pretending, only facing consequences. I had rationalized my own as a but in that reality, I had long before I betrayed. Survival extended. It was about C and me. In the bluest moments, I had let that my mind off. It was the only viable. I reflected on the moment, every crumble, Daniel growing, the ways I had felt profound resentment for how he, but was the woman had married. I hadn't. The recent months had altered me into someone recognizable, a woman of hope, making driven by death rather than. I had to rediscover myself. Initially, I contacted Mr. Carter. His smug tone responded, but I cut him off. It's done, I declared firmly. He laughed lightly. So you got what you needed, and now you're finished. I swallowed the shame. I was wrong. I won't do it again. He sighed softly, a trace of disappointment lingering. The decision is yours. I ended the call before he could continue. It transcended his influence. It was about seizing power, refusing the role of victim to my own error. The following weeks were dedicated to reconstruction, both financially and emotionally. I seized every opportunity, waitress, freelancing, whatever was necessary to keep my head above water. The experience was arduous. Some days seemed utterly insurmountable, yet each dollar earned and each step forward felt like the recovery of a part of my identity. Daniel didn't call or text, and I didn't reach out. I had clung to something broken for too long. At this point, I realized some things are simply not meant to be repaired. Sometimes, releasing what no longer serves us is the wisest choice. One evening, after a long shift, I found myself standing before the mirror, truly observing my reflection for the first time in months. Not the desperate woman who had made an irreversible choice, but a resilient one who had faced torment yet remained standing. The past was unchangeable, but it didn't shape my identity. I had learned through hardship that desperation can drive individuals to unimaginable actions, and betrayal isn't always straightforward. Often the most regrettable decisions stem from suffering rather than malicious intent. Yet I also discovered that salvation is attainable not through apologies or regrets, but through transformation. I had transformed, and that version of myself was gone forever.